Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. And I have the honor of getting us started today. And I am Barney, and I am joined with my co-host, and he is
Jacob.
And today we have a wonderful guest with us today. We've been excited for finding the time to have him on with us today, and he is
Ralph.
And Ralph Reinford, he was the pastor at Worcester Mennonite for a number of years. And I remember kind of like I've told the story of how I kind of got to know about Jacob. You know, I always hearing things secondhand. You know, people were saying, oh, yeah, here's Jacob. He's at, church. You've got to meet him, and I said, I can't wait to meet Jacob. And then I kept hearing, oh, here's, we're thinking about this pastor from North Carolina, and he's a carpenter, and everyone's getting really excited. And then when it was decided that Ralph would be the pastor at Worcester Mennonite, I was at Goshen College, and I was working as an intern at the Fourth Freedom Forum that I needed to do for my history degree. And I was just chatting with the previous intern, and he's like, yeah, what are you going to do for Christmas? He's like, oh, I'm going back home to North Carolina. It's like, oh, what part of North Carolina? Oh, a small place called Hickory. It's like, that's amazing. The pastor that's coming to our church, he's from Hickory, North Carolina. And they're like, he's like, no, you're having Ralph. You're the ones who are taking Ralph from us. And with that, I knew that for sure we were going to have a very good pastor coming to Worcester Mennonite.
Wow.
And so it's really an honor to have Ralph on here today. And, all of the time that I got to know him through growing up there at Worcester Mennonite in my when I was entering my adult years, and then learning more about his background from before he was working as a pastor, namely working with VS. And I thought for sure of all the things that we could talk about today, that would be one really fun topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks. And as Barney and I were thinking about questions to ask Ralph, we recognize that a big emphasis of our podcast is on the idea of meeting new people from a different culture or a different background, or going into a new environment and learning how to navigate that. And in some cases, to serve, to plug in. And so when we thought of inviting Ralph on, we knew that his time with voluntary service was very much one of those types of examples. And so our hope is that today, as you hear Ralph's story, it may give you ideas for similar situations in your own life. If you are traveling, or if you go into voluntary service or some type of intercultural opportunity, that you'll take with you some of the lessons or thoughts that we share about today as things to consider. But just to get started, Ralph, I wanted to ask, what is the story behind your decision to do voluntary service to begin with?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, because it really was precipitated by the draft that President Nixon signed on to during the Vietnam War. So for some of you probably read about that. But in about 1970, the draft was initiated, and so it really impacted a lot of young people like myself. So I was 1 year out of high school, and I was drafted with a very low number, and I knew that I was called to serve. And growing up in a conscientious Mennonite home, I knew that I wasn't, well, it was more than I knew. I had personal convictions about entering what we called back then the Green Machine, the United States Army, and the warfare that was going on at that time. So that's what precipitated it. I was called and I got a number 8, and within a month, I was called to go to the selective service and have an examination. And so then I knew I needed to decide very quickly what alternate service I could do. And it's hard to think about this, but like I went in January of 72, I believe it was, and there was like 30 young adults in my orientation group. And the mission boards really had about that many every other month for going into service. So if you can
Wow.
imagine the effect that had on churches and young people, it was pretty incredible. Yeah. So that's what precipitated it. And I was in a couple of weeks' time, I was through orientation and had to decide where to serve. And I'll let you ask the questions because I don't want to follow too many rabbit trails in terms of how that all happened, But I have many stories about what happened during that time. Yeah.
It's interesting. I just thought of this, and I don't think that this was maybe on the path that we thought we would take today. But it's interesting the point you bring up about how having this many youth getting called into service, how it impacted the church. Because in one way,
Yeah.
it's really positive, thinking, "Wow, all these people want to go into service." But on the other hand, there's all these youth that are leaving that aren't present in their congregations anymore.
Right.
And I'm curious. I mean, how was it? How did you feel then when suddenly you are needing to leave your family and then also needing to leave your home congregation? And how was it that you eventually were able to decide that you wanted to end up going to Mississippi? Is it that you ended up?
Yeah. Well, we there. I think it had to be done very quickly, but I think back then we were all aware that this was forthcoming,
Mm-hmm.
and we were encouraged as young adults to have a file with our church membership, stating our position when it comes to the military, and so we weren't really questioned at that point. The government had accepted the Mennonite Church as being a peace church, and the mission boards as being the avenue or the vehicle which the young adults would serve alternate service. So I got a number of choices from the mission board in terms of where I could possibly serve, and like I said, it was moving so quickly that the placements were incredible. So I thought I was going to be going to North Carolina to work in a hospital, and that never materialized because by the time I got to Elkhart for my orientation, Elkhart, Indiana, that placement was no longer available. So they reassigned me, and I was super disappointed because I had to come back east to Ohio. So God has a sense of humor too,
Right. Yeah. That was kind of maybe my follow-up question. Did you, since things were moving so really fast with everything, this probably, do you recall it kind of feeling like it's something that's completely out of your hands, and
It was.
and you could really kind of sense God directing you to choosing the right path? Did you feel?
Well, at the time, I don't think I thought it was God, because to be put on a Greyhound bus back to Ohio from Indiana, that was going the wrong direction. Definitely, it was a long trip because I was really upset that I thought I was going to be going south or west, and it didn't happen. So, yeah, but it was pretty obvious that I did come back and spent 1 year in Youngstown, Ohio. it was an inner city experience. And so if there's any things to learn about cross-cultural experience, a country boy coming and living in an inner city, we had probably 6 locks on our door. It was like, wow, what is this? This is crazy. But we worked with the Rockview Referral Agency there in Youngstown, which provided services for the poor of Youngstown, and so I was part of a group that we started doing home improvements. So here's another irony, is that there was 3 or 4 of us doing these home improvements in the city of Youngstown, and we worked on 90 homes in the first year, and we got recognition from President Nixon. So go think about that. Yeah. But we were honored. Our agency was honored for the work that we were doing in Youngstown, Ohio. So, So I think the whole thing of the inner city life and the multicultural life, I was kind of thrown into, and you learn rather quickly about how to cope and how to live in a different environment.
And as you were working in that environment and getting to know the people, did your sense of the disappointment in the experience transform a bit? Did you start to feel a little bit like there was purpose there, like you discovered meaning there as well?
Well, yeah, it wasn't the most perfect situation, and so soon, they had struggles as we call them VS households or units. So there was like 6 or 8 of us that were living there, and the relationship with the church wasn't perfect. And in fact, the pastor was somewhat authoritarian, and so being young and wanting to do things, it didn't always, it wasn't the most positive relationship. And so that's what actually the VS unit closed there within a year after I came. So we had a lot of conflict to deal with, although it wasn't very overt. It was sort of, it was under the table. We never really got it out and talked about it, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too, going back to Barney's earlier question of coming from a situation where you're leaving your home and your home community and thinking you're going to a different place, and then it's changed on you, and then you end up in yet another community, and that's situation in that voluntary service opportunity is strained by this awkward relationship between the local church and the partnering agency. Is that hard? Was that a hard experience to go through in terms of your morale for the church in general, like to see, or did it kind of just bolster your commitment to keep working at the renewal of the church, or what was that a weighty thing to go through to have it be so discouraging?
Yeah. Well, I think going through it, you don't always see the positive, but I think I came through that still pretty optimistic about the church, and then at the end of that year, when the unit was decided to close down, I was moved, went back to Elkhart, Indiana, and then to find another location to serve, because I had a 2-year commitment. And then I was here again, sent, so to speak. I went to La Junta, Colorado, just to be the household leader And so what was interesting to me, what was I, 18, 19 years old at that time? And right away, the leadership skills that I didn't really recognize in myself surfaced, and people looked to me, and then I was placed in leadership roles pretty quickly, which really I had a lot of bumps along the way, but learned to lead others, and was very affirming to me.
Yeah, I was doing the math as you were telling that story, and I also thought, if you were just out of high school, you must have just been right, exactly 18 or 19, and then suddenly they're asking you to be the leader of the group there.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about a little bit about my dad's story as he also went into voluntary service instead of entering the draft, and in his case, he was finished with university. And so he kind of knew the direction that his career was going to take. And he took those skills and applied them to where he was. But you were just out of high school at this time.
Yeah.
What were you thinking in terms of your career before entering VS? And then how do you feel that this experience, both in Youngstown and Colorado and beyond,
Yeah.
how did they impact how you saw the direction of your career and vocation going from that?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. And I think if you can remember back to those days, nothing was very clear, You didn't really know what I was going to do. It affected my further education because I was considering college. And then when I was drafted, I said, well, that's not even a possibility. That goes on hold. So voluntary service really determined a lot of, or affirmed a lot of my gifts, so what I was able to do. And so that became very formational, in terms of an experience that you have challenges put in front of you that you have to deal with and work through, and living with a group of people. I mean, you have eight or 10 single people, all with their hormones, going on, and it was a wild time. It was anti-war. There were demonstrations in the streets of Youngstown. So there was all kinds of things that you experienced and had to think through, so yeah. I think my experience then in Colorado was helpful because I got connected with the pastor there. He became my mentor, and he was the kind of guy who just allowed me to tag along with him. So like, he was on the board at Heston College, and he would say, hey, I'm going to Heston. Do you want to ride along? And it was a 6-hour drive. So I say, sure, I don't have any commitments or anything to do today. I'll do that. And so I used to go to the board meetings at Heston College in the early 70s because he was a board member. And we have conversations the whole time. He was really the one who affirmed and encouraged me to be a pastor. And it was a delightful time to work with him and sort of see the inside scoop of how the church works. There in La Junta, it was a small congregation, but he was a very compassionate leader, well respected in the church. And so that was a very affirming time. Yeah.
Just as you were talking there, Ralph, it dawned on me that when you went into voluntary service, it wasn't necessarily clear that you would go into ministry or be connected with the church, but it was kind of this mentorship, this relationship with the pastor that helped bring clarity to that, and some of your other experiences. So you had this close mentoring relationship with him, and then did it lead to the next steps after Colorado, or was it a little bit further down the road that the clarity came?
It was still further down the road, because I sort of pushed back about wanting to be in church leadership, you know. So I mean, I think it's obvious because my undergraduate degree was in sociology and agriculture. Okay, so I was thinking missions, you know. I was thinking about serving in Africa. You know, you have these big dreams about being a big splash in a different country. But anyway, I think so I brought in my education out anyway, in terms of um, wanting to work with people, but not necessarily directly in the church. So so that was really stirring in my mind, and I don't want to get too far ahead of you, but what happened then is that I got married during my college years, uh, and my wife uh, was a nurse, and so I always talked with a lot of excitement about voluntary service, and she says I convinced her. But we did decide after college to serve again, and we served for 5 years. Uh, Barney said Mississippi, but it was Alabama. That's okay. Uh, so we went to Alabama, into one of the 10 poorest counties in the United States, and I was there doing community development and agricultural work, and she was doing nursing, and uh, and that was a very it continued to be an experience of grand proportion, you know, in terms of expanding our horizons in so many ways. It was a totally Black community. There were only about 10% of the county was white. But so it was a very, I think one of you referred to it, or almost like cross-cultural. It was like another country to live in that area. And there's a great story behind all that, about where things are at now in that community. So, and we can't take any credit for it. So, yeah.
Well, as you mentioned that, I would love to hear just maybe a little bit of what you were able to do when you were there, and then if you do feel like it's okay to share an update on where things are today, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, well, I think, yeah, it's hard even to put into the short form, you know, about what our involvements were. I mean, there was a quilting bee there that a, a Catholic priest started, who wanted to create extra income for the community. So he worked at creating markets for them to make. They had a contract with Sears and Roebuck, and also had made quilts for um, an outfit in Philadelphia. So we were there. We were actually asked to come to both provide quality control for that quilting bee, and also we they wanted to have more medical attention. So my wife Barb, she was asked to do an evaluation or an assessment about whether the community was big enough to have a doctor or a clinic or something like that. So those were our involvements, along with uh, a lot of crazy things that went on while we were there. You know, the federal government was always throwing money at poor communities, but not telling them how to use it necessarily. So, like, we had um, water lines that were put in. So I hooked up, you know, water to each of these houses along the road, just so they would have a faucet with running water at the house. That's how primitive or poor it was.
Wow.
So that would be one example of one of the minor things I did. But then my wife Barb, she we actually started a health clinic and got a doctor there, and it's still operating today. So it's really fascinating. And the bigger story really is that the quilting bee, which was doing uh, uh, just small projects, actually the quilts they were making shifted from being quilts for warmth and comfort to artifacts. So the the quilts have become very expensive quilts that they make because of their art form. And in fact, 2 years ago, they came to Cleveland with a quilt demonstration, and it was incredible because we went and met people we worked with had come to show their quilts, you know, and it was a mind blowing time to see how these quilts have now become popular and very expensive quilts because of their art form, you know. So we have several books and things about the quilts and the people behind the stories. Yeah,
That's really beautiful. I love that image of it starting out as something that was um, to make money, like
yeah,
to build economic capacity, but then it turns into this art form that is an expression of the creativity of the community, the gifted people in the
yeah,
community. That's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, I also really appreciate how this was started with the Catholic priest who got it started, and then there was more church involvement to really kind of, it shows about the grassroots working people there who were there, like you said, instead of the government you know attempting to help. It really
yeah,
took the volunteer people to get everything headed in the right direction and get the needs met in the way that they needed to be met. um I'm I'm curious, going back just a little bit, hearing your story a little here and there, how you thought about, maybe going to Africa or being a missionary or something. It seems that from when you were younger, you felt this call or this real passion for serving in other cultures, maybe outside of the US. You were thinking, and then you mentioned how different this county was that you were in. And did it really feel um, like, did you feel kind of a fulfillment, a real fulfilling sense after serving there? Or did you also still have this kind of longing for serving, even, out of the country? Or
yeah,
was there something really special about this service assignment that you had this time?
yeah. That's a great question. I think there was a lot of fulfillment that we felt in meeting the needs of the people of that community. I mean, we were sort of living by our shoestrings, in many ways. And I mean, I even got, I had a little bit of carpentry experience before I moved there, but what really propelled my some of my work was that our neighbor's house burned, and we realized the helplessness of living in a community where there was no fire department, you know, and actually not even a good source of water. So we didn't really resolve that issue, but we did. I did uh, help him rebuild his house, and then I said, well, a lot of people need houses, so I ended up helping to build about 5 houses in that community, and that was a real sense of fulfillment, in a sense that we improved the living conditions of the people that were living there. Most of them have just shotgun houses. You open the front door and the back door, and you could see right through, and there was no glass windows or anything like that. So to give them a warm, comfortable place to live was really rewarding in many ways. You know, I don't know if I answered your question, Barney.
Yeah, it sounds. Yeah, I think in a way, yeah. Um, it it sounds like working through this kind of ministry of building homes and helping to get homes built, both in Youngstown and then there. You really probably got a sense of what it meant for what being a neighbor meant in these
Oh,
different cultures. How you we kind of people who live in the city or people who live in suburbs or people who live in the country, like what a neighbor is and the role of a neighbor is pretty different. What could you kind of say kind of what it meant to be a neighbor, what
wow.
being a neighbor meant there in Alabama?
Yeah. Wow, that's a hard one to answer in many ways because of living in a racially diverse or a relational a community where we identify with minority, but yet our skin was white, was really uh, eye-opening, because like we attended the Missionary Baptist Church, and because our skin was white, they thought we should sit on the front pew or we should teach Sunday school, and we worked at saying, no, we come to worship with you, be with you. We don't need any special privileges. And it took a while, but they did accept us like that. And but that they were as confused as we were, I think, because they never had any uh, white people who respected or gave them attention like we did. And we weren't the only ones. I mean, VS had a bit of a history there, and other people were working at different things as well. But yeah, what does it mean to be a neighbor? I think it means to have time for those who live close to you. For me, I was very I grew up with a strong work ethic, and so you would go to their house when they ask you to help them with something like plow a garden or whatever, and instead of just going and doing the task, they wanted you to come and sit on the porch and drink a cup of coffee for an hour or two before you did that. And I think that kind of learning to be a neighbor was really important. It was probably more important that I sit on the porch and listen to them than it was for me to do the work. And so I had a lot of things I needed to learn myself. But I mean, a lot of the land was still owned by the 10% of white people that lived in the county, and I had the opportunity to work with them as well, which was kind of strange. But like in the spring when they needed a tractor driver, they would come and they would ask if I would, drive their huge tractors, 40-foot disc tire, and it's like, that was like a dream for a little kid like me, to get on this powerful 500 horsepower John Deere and work the ground. So I got to work with them as well, and I think we helped to build some bridges, although there certainly was a lot of work to be done even after we left. So yeah, but we still have lots of friends in Alabama, which we are grateful for.
Yeah, one of the things that is interesting to me is the idea of building bridges, like you said, connecting people, helping them to see the needs of another in the community, and your work there enabled you to interact with groups on either side or in different aspects of life there. But I kind of wondered, as you look back on that, where did you sense God at work? And I know that's a very general question, but there's some areas of ministry that are definitely inspired by God and the things that were taught in Scripture. But then there's some moments where you say that was a God moment, where it felt like it went beyond just being inspired by it. It felt like God was actively present or powerfully working. And did you witness anything that sticks out in your mind during those experiences that you say, oh, those were times where I feel God was powerfully at work in what was happening?
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think we felt God was at work in everything we did in many ways, because it was like we had opportunities that now, if I look back, I can't even believe that we were in some of those situations. I mean, one example that comes to mind is John Powell, who is still living, a great civil rights leader, lived in Jackson, Mississippi, which was just like 3 hours from us. We had him come and share a meal in our house and ask his advice in terms of what we could be doing in this community that we weren't doing. And he was really candid with us, And I said, we did that. We allowed him, who was beaten up so many times as a civil rights leader. We asked him for advice and shared a meal with him. Those were certainly life-changing God moments,
Mm.
But at the same time, I think like I said, we were there for 5 years, and near the end of the fifth year, I'll just share this story, is that, we were involved in a lot of things in the community, doing a lot of good things, but I still had this gnawing inner struggle that I wasn't doing enough, or that this was really more of a spiritual problem, that we needed to work at transforming lives if we were going to make a difference. And I think that's why after 5 years, I said one night in bed to my wife, I think I want to go to seminary. And she popped right up in bed saying, "You're going to do what? You want to be a preacher?" And I think that was a moment of clarity, that we weren't quite on the same page, but at the same time, that's when she realized that I still wasn't totally content of living there and doing what we were doing. We weren't making a big enough difference.
That's so interesting, Ralph, because as you're talking there, I'm listening to your story and viewing it through the lens of the later part of your ministry when I've known you. And when I look at some of the things that you've done at Worcester Mennonite Church when you served there, or in Ohio Conference after that, it lines up perfectly with what you're describing here, in terms of this idea of God being powerfully at work and bringing people together and building bridges. I think specifically at Worcester, how you helped connect Worcester Mennonite with Second Baptist Church, in a few joint worship experiences. Second Baptist being one of the Black churches in our area, and creating that space where we could learn from each other, appreciate each other, and then also a service trip to Youngstown with another African-American Mennonite church in that area. And then most recently, through Ohio Conference, your work helping the conference connect with Congolese refugees who wanted to become Mennonite and connect with Ohio Mennonite Conference. And
they're going to do it.
Yes. And the 5 years of that journey culminating this past Sunday in the licensing of 2 of their ministers, and just how that not only in the early phase of your ministry, but even throughout the later periods, seems to be a meaningful part of what drew you forward, is to try to build these bridges. So that's very meaningful to me. And it's interesting. I'm sure, though, for Barb, it probably took a while to wrap her mind around the idea of you going to seminary and
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because she is everywhere we lived, she managed to get into more community things than I did in many respects, and had very important roles as well. I mean, not only starting the clinic in Alabama, she was the executive director of a food pantry in Hickory, and now her work here in Ohio of being involved with the 2 clinics in Mount Eden that she is, which is meeting some of the most disadvantaged people of Wayne and Holmes County. So she hasn't been sitting on the sidelines, or she's been
that's
busy as well.
interesting. So like
Yeah,
her sense of calling and how she's invested and uses her gifts is really complemented well and tied in well
yeah,
with yours. And
yeah, very much so. Yeah.
is there anything else that you would say to our listeners in terms of getting through the hard stuff when you are in an intercultural experience and you do find things certain times to be discouraging or confusing or maybe complex? Any words you would give to them of encouragement of how you work through that, like and not give up?
Well, I think it's just true that we learn more from hard times than we do from when we're just successful or winning, But it's hard to see the lessons in the hard times, but they're there, and there is something to learn. I don't think we mentioned that I just recently retired, so it's only been seven months. But when I retired, my family gave to me. I should have brought it. I'm in a different room than I normally am because of computer issues, but they gave me this nice plaque that has the 9 different locations that we lived in, or I lived in my lifetime. And at the bottom it says, "So much of who you are is where you have been, but so much of who you are is how you have served others." And I think if there is a lesson in all that, it really is important how we are neighborly and how we relate to those who are closest to us, and the attitude and the Christ-like spirit that we have in sharing the love of God with others. And so I think that's an important lesson behind all that.
Wow, that is so well said. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. And I want to ask Barney, are there any other questions that you wanted to ask Ralph before we conclude our time, or also extend that to Ralph too? If there's anything else that you'd like to touch on before we conclude our time, I just want to extend that to both of you now.
Yeah, I think I could think of a number of other questions, and I'd love to hear. And maybe it's a chance to have Ralph on again. Um, but it was really so wonderful to hear these stories and hear about how your journey has gone, and from such a young and formative age too. And it's especially, I echo what Jacob said, at the end, talking what you mentioned about the plaque, and about all that we learn from the hard times, the places we've been and how we've helped others it's just so impactful the way you said that. And it's been great having you here with us today.
Well, thank you.
we will also want to thank our viewers and listeners for joining in this conversation. We hope that you have learned some new things about what it means to be a neighbor, what it means to engage and serve others where you are in life, even when it's a surprise curveball or change that you weren't anticipating, like Ralph's early VS experience going to Youngstown. It's not what he anticipated, but still, wherever we're placed in life, we can plug in and be a neighbor and serve others. And there can be great meaning and purpose in that. And we're so grateful for this time. And until next time, goodbye.